That's my wife's dropping the Mars off. Okay, everybody, again, continue your coffee. Reporters, if you want to get to your stations, and we're going to get started. We have a great legislative panel with all the leadership, and we certainly appreciate them being here. Senator Blair will be here next. Delegate Hanshaw is leading off the panel. Senator Baldwin is here in the back of the room, and Delegate Skaff will be here, and I'm sure most of you can appreciate this. Delegate Skaff is coming after dropping off his children, which my wife dropped off ours today, so life goes on no matter what happens. This is our first event in 2 years. Excuse us if we have any bumps. We're doing our best here. It's hard to get back into the saddle. But with that, I want to thank Delegate Roger Hanshaw, Speaker of the House, for some time. And he's going to give us some updates on the legislation so far, what he sees going to the final days, and if there's time, maybe a question or two. I'll turn the mic over now.
Well, friends, good morning. Don, thanks for having me today. You know, it's a happy day 37 to everybody in the room today, if you're like us who keep account. And it's amazing how quickly 37 days goes. You know, my very first job after completing undergraduate school was with the Department of Agriculture here in West Virginia. I worked for a gentleman named Steve Hanna, who many of you here in the room would have gotten to know. Steve was from Jane Lew and was Deputy Commissioner of Agriculture at the time. And part of my responsibilities with the Department of Agriculture back then included managing the department's rules bundles when the Department of Agriculture sent rules through the rulemaking review process, and shepherded those rules through the legislature. Someone, of course, has to be there and speak for those rules. And my job as a young professional back at the time was to shepherd those rules through the process. And I always remember now, it didn't seem as much of a gem then to me as it does now. But Deputy Commissioner Hanna said, Roger, 60 days is an incredibly long time, or is an incredibly short time if you're trying to get something done. But boy, it's forever if you're trying to keep something from happening. And that's where we are. We're on day 37 of 60, so it's appropriate that we pause here for a few minutes today and talk about sort of where we are with the legislative session, but maybe more importantly, where we are with the state and where we think this legislative session fits into the overall vision for where we are as West Virginia, where we're headed, how we got here, and where we think we want to be. You know, we have learned a lot in the last 2 years as a state. We have learned how to do things remotely that many of us never before would have even thought possible. We have learned how to work in multidisciplinary teams across functional units to solve problems that many of us, as recently as 2 years ago, would have assumed or even said had to be solved with the silo approach that state government and even private industry to some extent often has still today. And we've learned that knocking down those silos and learning how to work remotely is not only important for our survival, but also it helps us advance the ball more quickly than we otherwise might if we were working through the traditional sort of machinery of government. And we learned perhaps nothing more than what we learned on day -3 of the legislative session this year. So go back not to day 0, but to day -3, because day -3 was when we called into special session at the request of the governor to deal with the economic development announcements that set the stage for this entire legislative session. I think it's fair to say that for many of us, the priorities that we've tried to advance this year and that we'll be continuing to advance over the course of the next several legislative sessions are a direct and clear outgrowth of what we learned during the process of recruiting the largest economic development announcements ever in the history of West Virginia. And obviously I'm talking about the Nucor announcement, but don't think that's it. Let me remind you, we had 3 announcements that week. We had the announcement of Nucor's steel mill in Mason County. We had the announcement of Green Power's electric school bus manufacturing facility here in Kanawha County, and we had the announcement of Owens & Minor's medical device packaging and distribution center coming to Morgantown. We have some additional interesting announcements that will be coming up for you soon, but I'll leave those for another time for the Department of Commerce and Economic Development and certainly not steal their thunder here today. But what did we learn? What did we learn from those announcements? We learned that things that don't always rise to the top of the list when we discuss economic development are in fact critically important. And they're things that we absolutely must not take for granted. They're things that we have to be prepared for. And I had the privilege to be on the inside of some of those conversations as we led up to closing those transactions and actually announcing those deals. And they were certainly educational moments for me. And they're things that helped shape my thinking as to how we move forward as a state in recruiting and announcing the next series of those announcements. One of the first surprising things to me in those conversations was the extent to which West Virginia's rainy day fund, the state government's rainy day fund, plays a role in recruiting and attracting corporate, private, and sector investment. So one of the things we learned was that corporate private sector investment takes very seriously a state's budget situation, because without a steady financial house, without a steady budget situation, corporate America views wild swings in corporate taxation as a possibility and simply steps away from states in which that's likely to be a situation. This year in the House and in the Senate, we're likely to pass a bill that caps our state's rainy day fund at where we are today, which is just over $1 billion. We have one of the most well-funded rainy day funds in America. We have just over 23% of state budget in our savings account. So today, as we sit here this morning on day 37, we have one of the healthiest rainy day funds in America at approximately 23% of overall budget spending. That's fantastic, because what that means is we have maxed out the extent to which we as a state can benefit from squirreling additional money away into our savings accounts. Our bond ratings cannot go higher. Our standing on Wall Street cannot be better, because we've done what corporate America has looked for us to do. We have made those kind of decisions. We also learned on day -3 the extent to which having sites ready for construction matter. Having property ready to be developed is critical. We learned that it's not enough to be able to say to those who are looking to place capital somewhere in the world, and realize that is where we compete. We're competing with announcements that are going to be made globally, not just where they're going to be made here in Appalachia, but where they're going to be made in the world. We learned that having sites ready for development matters. And we had a site that was suitable for Nucor's announcement and for their investment here in West Virginia. Thank goodness that we did, but we need more. We need more of them. And yesterday, the House passed our site development bill. We sent that to the Senate. Now we're anxious to see that happen. Delegate Clay Riley's here this morning from Harrison County. Big thanks to Clay for helping shepherd that bill through, not only here during his time with the legislature, but also during his time at the Department of Commerce. It's important that we make the kind of investments here in West Virginia that allow us to have sites ready to be marketed, ready to be constructed, ready to have capital deployed on immediately. Because capital doesn't wait 3 years for us to run a water line. Capital doesn't wait 3 years for us to extend electricity service. When capital is ready to be deployed, it's ready to be deployed today. And we learned that on day -3, and we need to make sure that's a lesson we don't forget. I'm looking forward to that bill passing the Senate and becoming the law here in the next 23 days. We also learned that West Virginia is sitting on an infusion of federal funds and federal resources, the likes of which most of us have never seen in our lifetimes. And from an inflation perspective, I hope we never see again. But nevertheless, we are in an environment today in which we have literally billions of dollars of federal funds that need spent. And we know that absent a plan, absent a well-developed strategy for how we as a state, including all of our political subdivisions, every county and most municipalities in West Virginia, as well as all 55 county school boards, absent a plan for us to spend that in a thoughtful, strategic way, I've said before that we run the risk of putting on the greatest fireworks show ever held in the history of West Virginia. Yesterday, our Select Committee on Coalfield Communities advanced a bill to create a matching program whereby the state of West Virginia would provide matching funds for local political subdivisions who wish to apply for grants from private foundations, from private sources of capital, even from other government agencies, to utilize their resources and do development locally, to do so absent their ability to put together that match at the local level. I come from a community, as everyone knows, I live at Walback in Clay County, 34 miles north on I-79. And for so many years, the greatest impediment to our community being able to apply for and secure and draw down tens of millions of dollars in federal funds and federal matching grant opportunities has been our inability to put together the local match. It's not that we wouldn't want to do it. It's not that we wouldn't be happy to try. We'd shake the couch cushions as much as we can, but the match just simply isn't there. And yesterday, our Coalfield Communities advanced a bill that says the state of West Virginia will stand good for that match for appropriate situations. We have another bill that we'll take up in our Committee on Finance that not only addresses what the Coalfield Communities program did yesterday, but what we want to see happen in all 55 counties and all school boards and all municipalities around our state, whereby all local jurisdictions who want to do infrastructure projects, who want to do community beautification, who want to do any kind of local development can apply to our Department of Commerce, to the Infrastructure and Jobs Development Council for matching funding to create that local match to draw down additional state and federal funding. We think that's a big deal. We think it's a priority because we want capital to flow to West Virginia to create the kind of jobs that men and women in all of our towns and cities are seeking. But we know that absent a nice, clean, beautiful, prepared place to make that investment, those capital dollars will flow somewhere else. We also know that our economy is an economy in transition. We know that we are headed towards a 21st century economy. We aren't simply trying to catch back up with our neighboring states and simply participate in the 20th century economy as so many of us long for so long, but we're now trying to leapfrog that and become a true 21st century economy. So far this legislative session, our House has already clarified the ownership of compounds that go into some of the most sophisticated electronic devices that now power the global economy, and those are the rare earth minerals that we address not only in our House bill clarifying ownership, but also in upcoming bills in our committees, both on finance and our select Committee on Tourism and Economic Diversification, that lay out incentives for refinement and use of those minerals. They're called rare earth minerals if you're for the chemists in the room. Use of those rare earth elements and rare earth minerals in the production of electronic devices here in West Virginia. We want to see that. We want to see that because our economy today is held hostage by the global suppliers of rare earth metals, many of which are, shall we say, not friendly to the government of the United States of America. We view this as a national security issue, not just a way to pursue economic development. We also know that our executive, the leadership of the governor's office, and our Department of Tourism has made it clear that we have to be able to house workers in West Virginia. If we are going to be successful, we're actually going to capitalize on the benefits of attracting remote workers to West Virginia. We have to have a place for them to live. We have to have a place for them to live. The opportunity for that is perhaps best illustrated by the extent to which the very first class of the Ascend program was so far oversubscribed. The applicants who applied to that program dramatically exceeded the scope of space available to bring those workers to West Virginia. So we've filled that first class. We're looking forward to filling subsequent classes elsewhere around the state. But they have to have a place to come and live. They have to have a place to live when they come to West Virginia. So one of the governor's bills this session provides an incentive structure for the development of that kind of housing here in West Virginia in places where it perhaps isn't being built now. We're anxious to see that bill advance. We're advancing that bill now in the House. We expect that bill to eventually become law here in the next 23 days. We're excited about that. Our budget continues to be solid. We continue to remain in a place where we are seeing record surpluses in West Virginia. For the first time in my lifetime, we're talking about $100 million surpluses. Now, none of us here are naive, or at least I hope we aren't, and believe that that will continue in perpetuity. It won't, and we know that, which means we have to be thoughtful and strategic now about how we deploy those resources, how we make capital investment rather than growing the programmatic side of government. We intend to place that money into capital projects. You know, one of the things that we have in West Virginia is an incredible environment to bring people to view our state and enjoy the natural resources and seasons that we have here in the place we all choose to call home. We have an obligation as the government of the state of West Virginia to make sure that those resources and those assets don't crumble around us. We've seen examples of that. We've seen recent examples of that. And for so many of us now that are making decisions about how we allocate our state resources, that's unacceptable. And we just simply aren't going to let this opportunity pass us by. We're going to make billion-dollar investments in infrastructure. We're working hard now in deciding just exactly how do we allocate over $6 billion in federal infrastructure spending here in our state. And one of the rate limiting steps in that process turns out to be having workers available to actually do the jobs. So yesterday you may have seen the House advanced a bill on what we call apprenticeship tax credits. So we want trained, skilled workers in West Virginia. We want men and women who can fill the jobs in the skilled trades here in our state. We don't want them to have to be brought in from elsewhere around the country to West Virginia. We want our own workers here trained in the skilled trades, and we want companies in West Virginia to be incentivized to train our local citizens on how to do those jobs. So we advanced the bill yesterday that will expand and extend that apprenticeship tax credit here in our state. We think that's really, really important. Lastly, we passed a bill yesterday in the House that we sent to the Senate. Delegate Skaff and I are the two principal sponsors of that bill. the West Virginia Jumpstart program that's very technical in nature. It's based around insurance premium tax credits, but for the journalists in the room, I hope you'll take time to look at that bill, because what it actually provides is a venture capital structure in the private sector, to fund small business development in West Virginia in the same way that Wall Street venture capital firms fund big dollar investments elsewhere around the world and elsewhere around America. We know that many of the investments that come into West Virginia in the single-digit million-dollar investment scale change communities, fundamentally reshape the lives of entrepreneurs here in our state, can fundamentally reshape communities with a comparatively small dollar investment. We've provided now in that bill a mechanism whereby the private sector can make those investments in economically sound, bankable projects here in West Virginia in the same way that the large dollar investments get made on the coasts of America. So it's been an exciting 37 days. There are things that have happened here that we think in the long term can fundamentally reshape West Virginia. I see that on our tables today, and I'll end with this, on our tables today is a flyer about Yeager Airport. And I hold this flyer up today because it illustrates quite clearly the extent to which infrastructure matters. Infrastructure matters. If I could sum up the current thinking of the West Virginia House of Delegates in 2 words, I'll use those 2 words. Infrastructure matters. And our transportation corridors, our water and sewer projects, our broadband infrastructure, all the capacity that we as West Virginians have to make our state the place of choice for the flow of capital is critically important. For us, I think it's fair to say we can sum up the last 37 days with infrastructure matters. Thanks for having me this morning.
Thank you all for applauding. Obviously, the speaker had another meeting to get to, and he had to go right away. So we appreciate his time and the message he delivered. Senator Blair, who is next on the agenda, is tied up in caucus at the moment, but hopes to be over. Senator Baldwin has been gracious enough to come up and deliver the minority address at our breakfast, and we certainly appreciate Senator Baldwin from Greenbrier County. Senator.
Thank you, Don. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. Thank you for the invitation to be here with you this morning. I'd just like to talk about a few things, and I'd like to echo much of what the speaker just said, and then focus a little bit on a few things maybe that weren't said. So when I joined you all back, I guess it's been about 5 or 6 weeks ago before the session began at a look ahead, I said we need to focus our time in this legislative session on bringing our people home and keeping our kids here. I think that's the standard by which everything we do ought to be judged, because so many of the issues we face come back to that. A lack of population, and specifically the brain drain of young people who leave, and too many of which do not return. So, I think time is of the essence with that right now. In my mind, this is a big moment for West Virginia. The speaker mentioned this. You know, we have an unprecedented amount of federal funding that is here before us in West Virginia right now. We have a budget surplus that is likely going to approach $1 billion by the end of the year. We have a rainy day fund that sits at $1 billion right now. You combine all that with the fact that we are an attractive destination right now. People want to be in West Virginia. People want to live here. People want to travel here. People want to have, outdoor recreational experiences here, particularly in the district that I represent, for example. So these are all wonderful things. This is a real moment. This is an opportunity for West Virginia. I think we need to be putting all our energy towards taking full advantage of that opportunity. Make this a place that people want to be, specifically young people. And this is the caveat that I talked about before. The problem, we've got this wonderful opportunity right now in all these areas I've just mentioned. What I hear, though, from young people, especially young professionals, is that they're being driven away. They're being driven away by lack of job opportunities in their fields. They're being driven away by RFRA, so-called religious freedom. They're being driven away by quote-unquote anti-stereotyping. They're being driven away by quote-unquote anti-racism. They're being driven away by failing to pass non-discrimination protections. They're being driven away by failing to address the substance use crisis in a substantial way. And so I'm afraid that we are risking the future by spending so much time and so much energy on so many socially divisive bills before us that protect immediate political interests but do not protect the long-term interests of West Virginia. There have been some wonderful things done this session, wonderful things that the speaker talked about, and I want to congratulate him and his team on several of those. Nucor, green power, the site bill that he talked about, that is vitally important. I congratulate him. I can congratulate Delegate Riley. That is so important. I didn't realize it until a couple years ago. I spent some time with folks who that's what they do. They do site selection all across the United States. And I asked them, what do you look for? And I thought they'd say things about workforce, and they'd say things about tax policy on a state level. They said it's really simple. What we look for are ready sites. You got to have water, you got to have sewer, you got to have broadband. If you don't have it, we're not even looking at you. So bills like that are really important. AIDS in classrooms at early developmental stages, really important. Child well-being, pay raises. A lot of good things are happening in legislative session right now. The problem is that all that's being overshadowed. It's all being overshadowed by the divisiveness and the backwards-looking legislation that I referenced before. So this is our moment to shine. I feel like this is a real moment for West Virginia to shine, and we've got to make a choice. I think the next 3 weeks are going to have a significant impact on the next 3 decades. And I know we're famous for hyperbole around here, and that sounds like hyperbole. I truly think the next 3 weeks are going to have a big impact on the next 3 decades because of the enormity of the opportunity that's before us right now in those areas I outlined, with rainy day funds, with budget surpluses, with federal funds, with folks looking to be in West Virginia right now. Are we going to give them a reason to be here, or are we going to give them a reason not to be here? That's the choice before us in the next couple weeks. Thank you all very much for your time. Happy to stick around for a little while if there are any questions.
Thank you, Senator. If you want to stay at the mic, we'll see if there are questions right now. Do we want to do any questions? Mark Curtis.
Senator, to reference what you were talking about, yesterday I believe those 2 bills, the economic development bills for apprenticeships and for the site readiness, went through the House on a unanimous vote on both counts. I think the Nucor help went through on unanimous votes. But then you see the abortion bill, other bills, social legislation where it's very divisive and the debate gets very loud. So talk more about your concerns about the division, maybe having a counteracting effect on the good economic news that's been happening.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, well, I think that you've said it. I mean, that's exactly what happens. In spending time with, for example, those site selection folks, or spending time with folks who are doing business here or who want to do business here in the future, we've heard a lot of talk in the past, say around legal form, about how folks want certainty. They want certainty. They want to know what they're getting into. The problem with the social divisiveness that we see is that it does not provide that certainty. Sorry, that was me, I'm sorry. Talk about socially divisive, sound like that'll do it. The problem with those sorts of things is they provide that very uncertainty that makes this a place folks don't want to be, to raise their family, to do business. And so that's my concern, that this is our moment. We've got a real moment to shine. And which are we going to choose? We'll find out in the next 3 weeks.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, Steve Adams, Ogden Newspapers here. Obviously, at the beginning of the session, we always do a press conference with the minority, and you all lay out your priorities for the session. We're obviously approaching the deadline for Senate bills to be introduced next week. We're going to hit the crossover day at some point. What priorities do you all have at this point that you're hoping to get some bipartisan support for as we're approaching the kind of the 3 weeks till the end of session? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm still hopeful. You know, one of the things I talked about at that look ahead in terms of priorities was child well-being. And there are some bills moving on the House side in that regard that I think are positive steps forward that I hope we'll soon see in the Senate. There's one bill still yet to be introduced. It should be out in the next couple of days around the child abuse hotline. And so that is the area of concern that I think we've got to spend some significant attention on in the next 3 weeks, child well-being. I'm very grateful that the House is moving some of those bills along, and I look forward to seeing them in the Senate. And there will be, again, an additional one in the Senate that will come out with bipartisan sponsorship, and I hope will move pretty quickly.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. We appreciate it. Any other questions? A round of applause for the Senator, and thank you very much. We'll now have Delegate Doug Scaff with the House Minority Report. Thank you, Delegate Scaff.
Well, thank you, Don. It's always great to be here. You say House Minority Report. That sounds like a movie, you know, a Minority Report of Tom Cruise. Hey, I'm just excited to be here. Day 37. It's time flies when you're having this much fun, right? Delegate Kayla Young always says, we got to think about West Virginians first. We got to do whatever it takes to put the people of West Virginia first. Every piece of legislation that we, on the House Democrat side, focus on, who does this help and who does it hurt? I might have said that to you last year because it still resonates today. When we're viewing, just like the minority leader Baldwin said, words matter. I don't have to tell you all that. Words matter. And just for the mere fact that we introduce pieces of legislation up here with maybe no intent of ever running sends the wrong message. And it has sent the wrong message. And we've done a lot of fantastic things up here, a lot of bipartisan, fantastic things up here when it comes to new developments, job creation, the site readiness, Nucor, the green power electric buses. All this is fantastic. But then it's counterbalanced, counteracted. The headlines around the country have not been that because of divisive issues that do nothing to keep people in West Virginia and bring people here. I was excited yesterday. The speaker and I, we had a bipartisan vote, almost unanimously. It was, I think he spoke about it earlier. It was called Small Business Jumpstart Act, and it's a different concept. You know, there's over $200 billion of investments out there for small businesses in the country last year. None of it was in West Virginia. None of it. 17 of 50 of some of the poorest counties in the country are here in West Virginia that have no investment. We want to switch that by offering incentives for those people to consider investing in rural West Virginia, to consider investing in companies in rural West Virginia. That's what this act does. It's a different concept, but guess what? Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, they're already doing it. Once again, we're trying to play catch up, and we have to. We talk a lot about the larger corporations, but now we need to continue to focus on the small businesses, those 200 employees or less, who are the backbone of West Virginia. I was excited to hear the minority. We always talk about keeping our best and brightest in West Virginia, and that's our focus. That's been our focus the whole time. We do a great job, and it was great to hear in the headlines of the Gazette today talking about the Promise Plus, the Promise program, another $500. That's fantastic. We have a bill out there right now that was drafted by college students called the Promise Plus program. Well, what's this do? The Promise Plus program is sitting in committee right now. After they finish college, after they've received their initial Promise scholarship, if they stay in state for the same amount of years that they were in school, they get that additional money to stay in state and work. So if you have a job, those 4 years after college or graduate school or whatever it is, we give them equal amount if you stay in state and work. If you only stay 3 years, you're only eligible for 3 years. You stay 2 years, You're eligible for 2 years. This was developed by college students to say, this would incentivize me to stay. Then what'd that do? Help them pay off their college loans, help them buy their first, or rent their first apartment, maybe buy their first apartment, buy their first car. We need to do that. We do so much to attract these remote workers to West Virginia. Why aren't we investing in those that are already here, our students? We need to invest in them. We invest in them to get them to college. Let's continue to invest in them after college. You're going to see a lot of, well, you've already seen a lot of income tax. Every day I go in one of the committees, and I can't believe we find another sector that we can, give away a tax break to, but we do. I'm okay with that. But it never ceases to amaze me that we have some of our priorities mixed up. And what do I mean by that? There's been a bill out there for 3 years to address our nursing shortage, giving them a $5,000 tax credit. At the end of the year, they apply it to their income. $5,000. We are well underpaid to our surrounding states. We are paying our nurses that are traveling 3 times as much as in-state nurses. Why can't we incentivize them? We have a crisis on our hand. We have a teaching crisis on our hand. Why can't we do similar income tax breaks for those going into the teaching profession? These are still things that I, unfortunately, haven't seen any movement, and we're going to continue to beat the drum. Everyone talks about it. They know we have these issues, but it seems like we don't want to put our money where our mouth is. We have a nursing crisis. The governor did a fantastic bill. He created this academy or this initiative to get more nurses into the field. That's going to take a little time. It's going to take a few years for them to get to graduate and to get their feet on the ground. We need to help those nurses right now. They are leaving at record pace. Teachers are not going into the field because of all the COVID and all the drama and everything that's happened over the last couple of years. I don't blame them. We need to do more. So we need to help our current West Virginians first, continue to expand opportunities when it comes to, I'm all about tax incentives and credits, don't get me wrong. As a business owner, I think it's great. All the stuff we've done has been great. I'm waiting to see the benefits of it. It takes some time. It takes some time to develop. There's thing that we've been pushing for a while is the medical cannabis. We've been talking about that every year I've been here. 5 years, I think it was past maybe even 7 years ago, but we still are behind all of our fellow states. There's so much we could do. We have it in place. We continue to drag our feet. We could have been first, and I just hope we're not last. I really think we're missing that opportunity. And lastly, I'll just leave you with this, and I said this when I started. I love being up here. There's a lot of, I love working across the aisle. Speaker Hanshaw and I have a great relationship. We look together first of what we can focus on. But we have a real need right now that he and I, you'll see this come out if it hasn't already come up. We have a mental health bill that we've introduced together, Speaker Hanshaw and I, to focus on what's happening on our campuses, especially in WVU. We have a crisis right now. We are asking the governor to put some money aside to help specific mental health programs on all of our campuses. So you will see that coming out here very soon. Hey, I appreciate what you all do. Happy to answer any questions. Now that you have me here on the hot seat, I know Mark's anxious to jump up and ask one, but I'd be happy to stick around. And thank you for all that you do. I appreciate you covering us and getting the news back to all the residents of West Virginia of what's really going on up here. Thank you.
Questions? Delegate, you have time for questions?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Love to.
Yeah, Steve Adams, Ogden Newspaper. Similar question to the Senate Minority Leader. A little different situation in the House because you hit the deadline this week of when bills could be introduced. So we're getting to the 3-week point. And you've mentioned some of the bills here. You mentioned Promise Plus and all that. But are there any other bills still working their way through committee right now on the House side that you feel need to be a priority between now and the end of session? Thank you.
Well, I think we don't do enough to help when it comes to fair pay for women. We have the Katherine Johnson Act. We've introduced that the last couple years. I would love to see some movement on that bill. I know Barbara Fleschauer introduces that every year, and numerous people. I know it has bipartisan support. We just need to get it out of committee. I think we need to look at things that help. There's a lot of bills out there kind of incentivize what I just talked about, keeping our best and brightest in state that are sitting there not moving. It's great to have all these companies coming to West Virginia, but we have to supply the workers. And what better place to look is right here from within. And what can we do to keep those people here? So those are just some of the two. There's a lot of bills when it comes to that, not specific, but I could give you a laundry list of those.
Thank you. We have one more question, Mark Curtis.
Delegate Scaff, you talk about the division, and you're obviously in a small minority now, both in the House and
Hey,
the
we're
Senate.
22 strong. Come on.
Well, it's an election year. How do you craft a message that maybe changes some minds in the state and says, no, maybe they have better ideas, let's vote for their team? I mean, you've been losing now for last 4 election cycles. How do you turn the tide this year?
Well, that's great. You know, the unfortunate part is, you know, we do so much here. West Virginia Democrats do so much here, and a lot of times we can't help just, you know, the national stigma of the national party. Sometimes, you know, we get tied to that. I don't know how many times someone says, hey, you talked to Nancy Pelosi lately. What? Are you kidding? You know, it's just, we got to get out of that. We're here. We're local. We're West Virginia Democrats. I focus on West Virginians. They have their own issues over there in D.C. I think we have a great working relationship, Republicans and Democrats here in West Virginia, and a lot of times that gets misstated or, you know, not told. You walk down the hall. Here, we walk down the hallway, we talk to each other, we joke with each other. In D.C., I've been over there numerous times. They won't even walk down the same hallway together, Republicans and Democrats. So I think that's what makes us different. We have to get past that stigma that we are elected officials, Democrats and Republicans, working together to move West Virginia forward to make this a great place for all. So you're asking me specifically, what can Democrats do? We just got to do a better job of talking about our message. And some of these bills that we continue to introduce that will have direct benefit to all West Virginians. You know, I applaud everything that we've done and accomplished together this year, but I think there's more we can do and put the focus on West Virginians first, and that needs to be our message. And, you know, I want good people elected to office that care about making a difference in West Virginia. And I think it's, you know, we get so caught up on if you're a D or an R or whatever. We just need to work together, or else, you know, the rest of the country, they always make fun of West Virginia. We need to not make fun of each other and work together.
Thank you, Delegate. We appreciate it. Round of applause for Delegate Scaff, please. As we hear the message about bringing West Virginians and keeping our best and brightest, I look out at our young reporters. We have a lot of young reporters here. We have a publisher who's on our panel who's back from California who's going to speak in our third spot. We have a website designer who works for our association, Tyler Channel, who is working across the country, and he's working with our WVU program. April Calls here from WVU, and we have a newspaper ownership program with people from across the country who are coming and working with West Virginia at WVU to learn about newspaper management and look and chart the future. And we have newspaper groups here who have papers in West Virginia, in other states. We have Andy Nicely's here with his development online. Our papers are online. Our papers are doing new things, and we're using the best and brightest. We have 2 reporters for the West Virginia News Network who work for us in the front row here, who I know Matt's from out of state, but he's in West Virginia and loving it. So we're excited about what we're doing, and we're excited to hear that message. We hope that the legislation that we see supports that effort. We are trying to grow and build. We're in all 55 counties, and I think it's a very important effort that while we're supporting everybody else, let's support our newspapers in our local counties. We think that's important, and I want to make sure I stress that message. We are going to change our program just a little bit. Senator Blair is still tied up. We hope he can make it, but we are going to switch our panel. And Delegate Hanshaw brought it up, and at your table there is information, Yeager Airport, West Virginia's gateway to the world, and we certainly believe that. And we are thrilled today to have Nick Keller, who is the director and CEO of the airport, to address you for a few moments and talk about some of the things that are happening and some of the things that will be happening. Nick, we have a round of applause for Nick, please, as he comes to.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to speak at the West Virginia Press Association Legislative Breakfast. This morning, I'd like to update everyone on exciting advancements in aviation in West Virginia. At the newly named West Virginia International Yeager Airport, also known easier by our airport code of CRW, our vision is to become the most important economic engine in the state of West Virginia through advances in aerospace and education. In order to achieve that vision, we've adopted 9 strategic goals. It's in the booklets there in front of you. But our first goal is to create a positive customer service experience. You know, I always tell the staff that the airport is the first impression of the state of West Virginia for hundreds of thousands of people per year. We want to make sure that's a really good first impression. In the last year, we have a new gift shop, a new cafe when you go into the gate area. It's been modernized. Our concessionaire spent a good amount of money to completely rebuild it. It's open, it's inviting. It really looks like something you'd see at a hub airport, like if you're flying into Charlotte or Atlanta. And I think that's an exciting advancement. It's a much better experience. It's been very popular. Also, this year with the passage, or last year with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's a $5 billion competitive grant program for airport terminals and control towers. This is probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to put serious federal investment into airport terminal buildings, especially at small airports like ours. Our terminal building opened in 1950, and the control tower. We have the oldest FAA-operated control tower in the United States. Our terminal building has been added onto a multitude of times. Now, it doesn't really look bad, but you have the A gates, lower level gates, things that were designed for passenger propeller planes, not regional jets like CRJ 700s and 900s that you see today. So we started a terminal planning study that looks out at the next 30 to 40 years. What do we need at the airport? What kind of terminal do we need? Best case scenario. And what we've come up with, what it's shaping out to look like is we're going to have a brand new terminal building where the C concourse is, where American Airlines operates. And this would be, imagine a multi-level roadway like when you go to a larger airport where you have departures on an elevated roadway. You get dropped off. You would have you go in your ticket lobby, security checkpoint, and the gate area would all be on one floor. And then the gate area would be 600 to 700 feet long, really high ceilings, glass, a lot of open light, open air. You could see all the way down the concourse, so it would be a lot different than the experience now that passengers have. And there would be some really good concession opportunities. People arriving would go down an escalator into the new baggage claim, a rental car counter area. And then on the third floor would be administrative offices, and importantly for me, there would be a terrace, an outside terrace that would be open to the public, so a viewing area. You know, if people want to come up, watch airplanes, bring their kids. I want the airport to be a family-friendly place. I want to encourage people to come up, even if they're not flying, just to come up, hang out, watch airplanes, and hopefully catch the interest in aviation like I had since I was a kid. Our second goal is to build a U.S. Customs and Border Protection facility. And this facility is really essential for business in West Virginia. It would bring up and will bring the ability to have general aviation international flights up to 20 passengers. Prior to the construction of this facility, without customs, if somebody was trying to come to West Virginia internationally and do business, they may have to stop at another airport. It could be Columbus, could be Teterboro, Charlotte, stop somewhere else, clear customs, buy fuel, take off, land in Charleston. To me, that puts West Virginia at a competitive disadvantage. So we want to eliminate the things that we can do at the airport to eliminate competitive disadvantages. Our customs facility is slated to have a ribbon cutting on March 18th. Been affected by some supply chain issues. Unfortunately, originally it was going to be open in December. But it'll be open on March 18th, and then we'll be able to get international general aviation flights with up to 20 passengers. The other thing we're doing is we're working on marketing people that would be overflying CRW internationally right now that have to go somewhere in the eastern half of the U.S., stop and clear customs and buy fuel. For instance, you could have somebody flying from London to Kansas City, but they don't have the range to get all the way to Kansas City, so they have to stop somewhere and clear customs, buy fuel. We want to put the message out that you can do that at CRW. It's cheaper, it's quicker, it's a better customer service experience than a larger hub airport. So I think we will see international business just in that regards as well, which will lead to some more economic activity. This also led to the name addition that went in effect on January 1st. We've been Yeager Airport since 1985. Prior to that, Kanawha Airport. But as we looked at changes with the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve, getting feedback from the business community and others, it became apparent that if you're not from West Virginia, you really don't know where Yeager Airport is. So we wanted to add in the region-specific name, and West Virginia. We want it, as the brochure says, we're the gateway to the state. So we also want to make sure that we're the gateway for the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve if people are flying in. And then, obviously, with the customs facility, that does make us international, and we want to make sure that that awareness is out there with the public and with pilots and things like that. So that's what led to the name addition. Obviously, we never wanted to get rid of General Yeager's name. We're very proud that he is from West Virginia and all the contributions he's made to aviation. Another goal is investing in our employees. You know, I believe our employees are our greatest asset. We try to operate the airport as a team atmosphere. I'm really proud that since the pandemic began, we did not have to lay off or furlough any employees. We actually have done some hero pay, cost of living raises, and we've also invested in our employees through an employee education program where we'll help pay for a trade school or a college degree, things like that if it benefits the airport and benefits their job. Also, we've introduced a family scholarship program for dependents and paid parental leave. Another goal that we have is to make runway safety improvements and a runway extension. I would like to see a standard 1,000-foot long by 500-foot wide safety area at each runway end. Right now we have what's called an engineered materials arresting system, an EMAS bed. It's kind of similar to a runaway truck ramp you'd see on I-64, but this is for airplanes. And it meets FAA specs, but I would rather just have 1,000 feet of flat safety area on each end of the runway, and then ultimately have a runway length of 8,000 feet. Our current runway is 6,715, so we'd like to see it go to 8,000. The FAA has awarded us an Environmental Impact Statement grant, otherwise known as EIS. You'll probably see quite a bit about that in the future. There'll be some public comment, public meetings. But that's going to study all the potential environmental effects of extending the runway and doing the safety area project, which would include Coonskin Park. That will take about 3 years to do, and that really will determine if any environmental impacts can be mitigated, and if so, how they would need to be mitigated. That's the purpose of that study. So that'll really determine if that project can move forward. The other thing the airport wants to do is invest in aviation education and create quality jobs. That's why our partnership with Marshall University is essential. The Bill No Flight School opened their first class of students in August of last year, and now we have over 20 full-time college students going to school at Yeager Airport seeking bachelor's degrees in professional flight. Within 5 years, Marshall plans to have over 200 full-time flight school students, bachelor's degree seeking students at the airport. This will really help address the nationwide pilot shortage, but we're not finished with just pilots. Marshall's also working on introducing an aviation maintenance technician program at the Tri-State Airport. That should open up in the fall of this year. And then they're also looking at a bachelor's degree program in aviation management. Also, we've been working with the State Department of Education and multiple county boards of education to try to expand aerospace courses into our high schools. And I think now there's over 10 high schools in the state that have aerospace courses. So if we can create a pipeline to get the kids interested in aviation in high school, then there's a pathway to go to Marshall. Fairmont State has a pilot training program. So I think we're really laying the groundwork there to have aviation education. And that ties into the jobs, because if we don't have an educated workforce, it's going to be harder to bring those aerospace companies in here. Just in the last year at CRW, we've had a new company open up what's called a repair station. So an aircraft repair and avionics shop. They're also the only Cirrus aircraft service center in the state. Cirrus is a popular brand of airplanes. Marshall University is flying them. And they also have a Garmin service center, and most of the GPSs and airplanes are Garmin, so this is the first Garmin service center in the state. And prior to that, we had people going out of state to Ohio, to North Carolina, Pennsylvania, getting their airplanes worked on. So it's good to see airplanes coming back into CRW to get worked on that were going out of state. We also have plans to rehabilitate a large hangar to put in an aircraft painting shop. The aerospace industry is growing worldwide. There's a demand for paint facilities. Sometimes there's 9 to 12-month wait periods just to get your airplane painted. So we've got a tenant that's ready to go to move into that paint shop once we can get the hangar rehabilitated. That would bring 25 jobs within 2 years, and they project to paint about 85 to 100 airplanes per year at CRW. So I think that would be a huge asset. I cannot leave out commercial air service. Many people always ask me about flights to Dallas or New York City or anywhere that we currently don't have service to. And with COVID, we actually saw a 97% drop in passenger traffic in April of 2020, 97%. Now we're back to about 70% of pre-COVID levels, so we're off about 30%. And we're just now in the last month starting to really see business travelers come back. So that's really a good thing. But we also there's a nationwide pilot shortage. And then with the area losing population, it creates a significant challenge to try to get new air service, because anytime we go to an airline, if we talk to American, they're always going to look at the Charlotte flights. Are the Charlotte flights full? Are they making money? If they're not full and they're not making money, then they're less inclined to add a flight to Dallas or to New York City. So you kind of have to use what you have. But we also are focusing on the advantages now of the national park. The New River Gorge National Park and Preserve, that's really raised the attention of the public on visiting West Virginia. So if we can market Charleston as a destination and CRW as the hub to come in to go to the national park, I think that can really lead to advances with ultra low-cost service. We already have Spirit to Orlando 3 days a week. We're talking to them right now about starting daily service. They also fly to Myrtle Beach. So I think we're working on that on a daily basis, but it is a challenge. The Charleston Area Alliance, we've been working with them to create an air service working group that would have stakeholders from the government, business, and hospitality sectors. They can help advise us on where people think we need to have flights, but also more importantly than that, or as important as that, is the Alliance will be able to administer what's called a minimum revenue guarantee. The airport is prohibited under federal regulations from offering direct subsidies to an airline, but a revenue guarantee, what it does is it's basically an insurance policy for a new flight. If an airline's hesitant to start a service because they may lose quite a bit of money, then you have a revenue guarantee in place, and it would have a certain threshold for revenue, and if the flight doesn't meet it, then they could go to that revenue guarantee fund and draw down money so that they don't lose money on the flight. So I'm excited about that potential. We also want to grow our Capital Jet Center. That's our fixed base operator. Capital Jet Center and fixed based operators, they handle all your general aviation hangars, the fueling, towing aircraft, some aircraft de-icing. We have plans right now to build a new maintenance and public safety facility. It's designed, it's pretty much ready to go. And then that would lead to the construction of a brand new rental car service area. And that would also move the rental car service area and free up land for a brand new hotel that would have a rooftop bar and restaurant that would overlook the end of the runway. And then possibly an apartment building, extended stay type facility that would be next to the hotel that Marshall University would then guarantee some of the units for their flight school students. So instead of having to build a residence hall, Marshall students could take advantage of that apartment complex and live on the airport. Being innovative and thinking outside the box is really one of our key components of our success. I pretty much threw the box away when I became the airport director and CEO about 2.5 years ago, because I want to be innovative, I want to do new things. And one of the most innovative things that we have done is create what's called Operation Home Base. Many of you have probably heard of this, but this is a partnership with the West Virginia National Guard, the Kanawha County Commission, and the airport to attract military units to come to CRW and use the airport as a home base for operations on training detachments. How this got started was we had Navy helicopters coming into CRW to buy fuel. And I just started talking to them one day and asked them where they were going, and they said they were going out west to Idaho to land in the dirt because they didn't have anywhere in Virginia that they could do that. So that got us thinking, well, could we work with surface coal mine sites to use those for military training? So the airport authority now has agreements with several coal companies, with the National Guard, really mainly National Guard sites, to go out and have military helicopters land and just do training. They base at the airport, they buy fuel from the airport, they're spending per diem on hotels, on meals in Charleston. Last year we had over 6,000 military personnel come through the airport on training missions. So that's a whole new area of growth. Just last month, we received approval from the Defense Logistics Agency for what's called hot fueling. Hot fueling is pretty exciting because you're fueling the aircraft or the helicopter when the engines are still running or the rotors are turning. The military loves it. especially the Marine Corps and the Navy, because it's so much faster. They don't have to shut down the engines, cool down, start everything back up. You can hot fuel an aircraft in 15 or 20 minutes versus maybe 45 minutes to an hour for cold fueling. So that allows the military to get their fuel really quick, head back in the air, and fly more missions than they otherwise would have been able to fly. So I think throughout this summer, we'll see an increase in military traffic into CRW taking advantage of the hot fuel. There's only 4 civilian airports east of the Mississippi River that have that hot fueling certification. The airport also has a goal to improve Coonskin Park. I mentioned that the EIS is going to talk about environmental impacts in the park. The airport's goal is not to destroy Coonskin Park. It's really not to hurt the park. That being said, as part of the mitigation efforts for the runway project, the park is going to get some one-time infusions of money that hopefully can be used to really elevate and do things that never before would be possible because there wouldn't be funding for it. So I'm hoping that we can, in the long term, the park will get improvements from this project. I look forward to a strong future for aviation, not just at CRW, but also all across the state. And one of the most exciting opportunities is electric vertical takeoff and landing, otherwise known as eVTOL. eVTOL is a really brand new industry. So imagine aircraft that take off and land vertically like a helicopter, but then they fly like an airplane. And we're working with several companies now to get this technology in West Virginia. So these are battery-powered aircraft. And the thing that really sets them apart is they're completely different in their pricing. It's about a third of the cost or less to fly an eVTOL than a helicopter or fixed-wing aircraft. So what that's going to do is that's going to open up doors of opportunity that we've never had in the state for intrastate air travel. You know, I can see a day when we have air taxis, eVTOL air taxis going from Martinsburg to Wheeling, Morgantown to Charleston, Beckley to Huntington, something that could really be cost-effective and affordable, but also reduce travel times across our state. I think if we do the infrastructure correctly and we start to get electric charging stations at our airports, then we could have a day when people are flying in on Delta, American, or United, or Spirit into CRW, connect to the eVTOL air taxi right in the new terminal, and then fly to Fayetteville, fly to Canaan Valley, instead of having to drive and get your rental car there. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I'm really excited about it, and I think it's going to add a significant economic impact. And I'll just say our airports do have a significant economic impact. A study by the state concluded that over $1.6 billion a year in economic activity is related to aerospace. CRW provides an annual economic impact of $225 million and is responsible for over 2,940 jobs. So I think the future of CRW is strong as we continue to work towards achieving our vision of becoming the most important economic engine in the state through advances in aerospace and education. Thank you. Thank you.
We are going to move on with our business panel. We hope Senator Blair is going to make it, but we're not positive yet. Give me one moment. Our next speaker will address the ongoing lawsuit between the newspaper industry and digital advertising giants Facebook and Google. And we're thrilled to have Doug Reynolds, president of HD Media, here to address the lawsuit. And we'll have another speaker, Scott Refslin, right after that to also talk on some impacts of that. Doug, please.
Thank you, Don, for having me here today to visit with you for a minute and discuss our lawsuit with Facebook and Google, and perhaps share with you some of the things that we see going on, and hopefully provide you some help for how you look at it. First, I appreciate all the reporters being here today. It's incredibly important, all the work you do here day after day after day. But it's unfortunate the value you create for yourself and for your news organizations in the digital sphere is being siphoned away. That value is being taken from you by Facebook and Google, and in many cases by third parties that violate your copyrights, that create other websites and things like that, and that Facebook and Google does nothing to stop. So, what we're trying to create here is the future digital news ecosphere and how the value that you create will be distributed. And right now it is you create all this value, and in the digital side, very little of that value accrues to the benefit of the news organizations in this room. And if we don't change that in the next 10, 15, 20 years, I don't know how long that is, there will not be independent journalism. All information, all news and events will be portrayed as propaganda. Someone will pay to have that information put out in a manner that benefits them, or it will be the lowest denominator, most entertaining, whatever will generate the most amount of views. I get calls, I would say almost on a daily basis, or emails or texts that say, you should be covering this. There's this really important issue with the Milton City Council. There's not enough. There's only 4 policemen in all of Wayne County. And every one of those things, when people call me, I say, you're 100% right, we should. And at one point, we probably did have more reporters that covered those things, because that's our core community obligation. And those are the things we want to do. But in the digital world, that doesn't create the value of something that gets some more views or something that's sensational. So several years ago, and we had I didn't grow up as just like a digital, fighting the whole digital world. Every single thing that came along that I thought that we could use to increase our digital revenue, I jumped on every single thing, and we tried literally every single thing to do that. And we had our former publisher was a gentleman named Jim Heddy, and Jim had done everything in the newspaper business. He had went to school to be a writer. I guess he couldn't, he always said, gosh, I didn't make it at that, so they stuck me in circulation cells, and he went all over eastern Kentucky and sold newspapers for the Courier-Journal. He had been publisher of small papers in Winnipeg. He had been the ad director, circulation director in Charleston. Had left, come back, and was both the ad director and circulation director at different times, both jobs at different times. So he had done everything in the industry. And a few years ago, he started saying, these people aren't our friends. Well, why is that? Well, every new thing we try to create and sell, we generally find that either A, if it works well, they stop, if it's a Facebook or Google platform thing. B, they change the algorithm or they do something where it stops working. But I started thinking, you're right. We do all this stuff. Sometimes we have good results in the very much short term, and then almost always the value goes away pretty quickly. So started reading. There's a lady named Srinivasan that was at Columbia, and she'd written articles in the Law Review articles. Started reading, like, what's going on in this business space? And she lays out much better than I could the intellectual things that they were doing in terms of their terms of service and how it related to other businesses and things like that, the network effects they would create. So started this process of saying, hey, something has got to change. And I know that there is legislative efforts to try to do that in Congress, but it always seems to me in the legislative sphere, folks with the most money and power always win. So said, okay, we got to go a different direction here. We got to, basically, if you look at the tobacco litigation, before there was ever a final outcome in Congress, there was lawsuits. And, a lot of evidence came out as to what was going on and things that we intuitively know were going on. If you take a look at this Blue Jedi, if you Google it and take a look at it, it basically talks about the agreements between Facebook and Google that were private. And this is stuff that's been coming up in the litigation that has got out. There's a lot of stuff still under seal that the lawyers can't even discuss with me yet because we're pretty early on. We filed the suit about a year ago. And if you get a chance to read the complaint, Lee Wolverton, who's our executive editor, read it and said he felt like it was the best explanation in 50 pages of the journalism industry that he'd ever read. So I know there's a couple people here that are also plaintiffs and appreciate the support. But what we want to create is a new digital business model in the next 10 years. And I hope that, as we're up here as the legislatures, there's definitely going to be small bills and things like that legislators can do. I hope you keep reporting on it. And think about how do we retain the value of digital advertising, how we, in this new world, continue to try to keep those values and things like that, then those values can be monetized. So we're about a year into the case. It's been consolidated. There's a Judge Castile that's a First Amendment lawyer in New York. So all the cases are consolidated there. I think there's 35, 36 plaintiff companies representing about 225 individual publications. Let's see here. So right now there's some different cases. There's a Texas Attorney General has a third amended complaint, which is kind of the case that they're working off of now. And there's motions to dismiss their complaint that Facebook and Google have filed, and those are the broadest. So if those were dismissed, then obviously the more narrow for different industries would be dismissed also. But if they're not, then obviously they would get into more of the different individual industry groups, and then eventually into newspapers and what are the core common issues that are in dispute, and then eventually you would get down to each individual paper and how Google and Facebook's monopolistic conduct has affected each of our digital platforms. So that's where we're at. When we started this thing, the lawyer said, hey, this is a 10-year process, and it's going to be tens of millions of dollars to litigate. So it's obviously we're in year one, and there's still time for other plaintiffs that are interested. If you want to contact me, we'd love to sit down and direct you to the lawyers. I think they lay out a very compelling case as to what they want to see the future of the industry to look like. I think that would very much line up with the people in this room. If you have any questions, I'd love to take a shot at it. Go ahead, Mike. None of those three have. I would say that the Murdoch Group, the New York Times, I've had 4 or 5 interviews by the New York Times, been on Fox News. They seem to be very interested in the case, more so than some of the other out from a interest in the case. I would tell you that I've had some meetings with McClatchy, CNHI, some of the larger papers, I think, are kind of saying, hey, why don't you guys go? Let's get a little further in and think we start spending some money. I'm not sure they would join our group. I think our group, the largest paper, is probably 30, 35 newspapers. I think that for the most part, they would probably have their own case, maybe their own equities. The New York Times has a different digital case than we would. They obviously have a much larger digital reach, and I think they have maybe their own issues that are a little different than ours. Always good to see you, brother. Appreciate your hard work. I know it's a lot of work.
I think it's important that we all stay informed on this, and I think it's important that West Virginia, even though we're small, our newspaper groups, such as Ogden or across the country, we have a lot of importance here. We have multi-state groups. Many of even our weekly groups are in multi-states, like I say. So I think it's very important that we stay informed and aware of what's going on. One of the things that came up during this session today was the fact that the legislature is working to bring people back to West Virginia to work. And our next speaker, Scott Refslin, is someone who came back to West Virginia. He's at the West Virginia Daily News. He has the Hinton News, and in, I believe, some other publications he's either has or working on. But he's back from California in West Virginia. And we talked, and he has some interesting ideas about maybe the way the legislature can look at our industry, we can look at our industry and things we can do. And I wanted to bring him up, let him speak a little bit about that, and talk to a little bit about maybe somebody who's not been in our industry. I've been here 35 years, so maybe my view is a little different. But let's see and hear from someone who's come back to West Virginia to work and look at our industry. Scott?
Thank you, Don. Thank you, everybody. And Doug, that was great about the Google lawsuit. Just to clarify what the question in the back of the room was, Rupert Murdoch just literally calls up Sergey Brin and says, hey, you need to pay me for my law, all my titles and summaries, and he'll get it done. So he's in a completely different class than a small little fish over here. I moved back to West Virginia in 2017. I had just completed a software transaction acquisition in Silicon Valley, And I moved back because of my parents, and they didn't know my grandkids because I've been on the West Coast for probably 2 decades. And so I came back here, and I was working a little bit, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do? And I had seen that the Daily News had gone out of business in March of 2020, and Moffett, probably you all know Moffett, he decided to kind of use that as his exit point. And so the Daily News kind of floundered just for a little while, and when I have a office space right next to the Daily News, and I went and saw Judy Steele, who was the GM there, and she had this stack of cards about this big that were from all of the constituents. And the one on the top was a guy I went to school with, and he said, oh my God, please bring the Daily News back. We've lost our thread. We don't have a thread in the community. And that was my deciding moment. That's the one that I wanted to be in the publishing business. The reason why that I had kind of the craziness to do it is I've been in the tech business since about 91. I've been in Web 1.0, I've been in Mozilla, I've been in Web 2.2, I've been all the way through it. And in 93, I moved to Australia. My sister married an Australian, and I went down on a holiday, and I got convinced by the government to stay there because Bill Gates had just gone down there and said, hey, you guys need to be digital. This thing called the internet's coming. And so I went down there, and I worked for Apple Computers in their large-scale publishing systems. And I was the first person to walk into John Fairfax, who owns the Australian Financial Review and Sydney Morning Herald, and I literally cleaned out about 4 floors of people doing manual cut and paste. And I replaced that with computers and printers and the whole technology. And that was the entrance of digital publishing in Australia. And there was a guy, it was a union shop, and I had all the glares, and, I'm like, okay. And some guy came up and actually said, hey, man, what the heck are you doing? And, I said, well, this is where it's at. You have to change. You're going to have to move forward in this new industry. And he said, well, you're taking my job. And I said, I tell you what, if you go down to TAFE, which is their local vocational college, go to TAFE, get trained on computers, and come back and get 4 times your salary. And he's like, really? And I said, yeah, go, quick. So he did. So I guess where we are in the moment in the digital publishing world and the newspaper world is that we're at the point where we need to take paper out of the newspaper and create it into news publishing agency or publishing company. And I was talking to Matt last week, and he says, hey, can you tell them something that'll get them really riled up? And I said, how about if I tell them I don't read newspapers anymore? And how many people have a newspaper with you right now? Is there anybody who has a newspaper in their pocket? But you do, you have a cell phone. And what's happening is that every one of us, including all of the young guys, so young people to old people, we're getting used to reading titles and summaries. How many times do you do the death scroll? How many times has news alerts just happened since I've been sitting here talking? Probably 4 or 5 times. So you have a new device that's giving you this information and feeding it to you all the time, whereas newspapers don't do that. And so newspapers have their place. The thing that I'm starting to realize, not being from the newspaper part of it, but being from the digital part of it, is that newspapers need to change, and they need to come into where we are in the digital environment. So I know a lot of you have probably done the first case of, hey, let's go into the digital revolution, let's invest in all the computers, let's put Google advertising on there, and then you get your check from Google and it's 15 cents, and you're like, whoa, okay, why is it 15 cents? Well, what happened is that to expand on what Doug was saying, is that Google has become the empire, the batter, and the pitcher. And so what happens is that Google now is the biggest advertising agency in your town and is the biggest news agency in your town. And so they've completely decimated that. And you've probably heard about all the antitrust lawsuits that are going on, and that's, like Senator Klobuchar, I think, is driving that. But if you put it boots on the ground, what's happening is that it's decimating our news industry because we're not in control of our content. Google is exploiting our Fair Use Act by grabbing our titles and grabbing our summaries and putting it onto their own websites and driving all the traffic on it. And so they're using our content without that. So right now we're in early days of legislation because America, interestingly enough, is not first in this dogfight. They're actually third. Australia was first in the dogfight, and they actually got Google to start paying for titles and summaries. Fantastic. Secondly, is the UK now is going like, okay, let's look at Australia. That is okay. I think Google needs to pay for titles and summaries. Okay, fantastic. So that's going to put the money back in our content. And the thing that we need to realize is that I didn't buy a newspaper. I bought a content aggregation company. And so if you disconnect it from newspapers and put it into news, now I'm talking about, okay, I got content as king again. And that's what I do the best is I know how to take websites and generate content and generate views and generate capital. So what I'd like to say here is I haven't seen any real political will from West Virginia yet to actually help the newspaper agencies move into a digital world. And I'd like to kind of put that out there as like, let's talk to our legislators. I've already talked to Senator Baldwin. And I'd like to move it more into, maybe we can even have a digital working group to say, let's start thinking about how we can move into this environment. Because I'll tell you, when each one of you put in all the ads on your websites to see if you can monetize stuff, and then you got desperate because you only got $15, so you put on more ads and then more ads and more ads until the point where your site looks like crap because it's just ads. And so that drives people away because they don't want to see it. So and you're only getting like, okay, now you've doubled your money to $50 a month. So we need to change the way that is. And what's happened is that Google went to your local car dealer who used to pay you $10,000 for all of your advertising and said, hey, why don't you give me the $10,000 and then I'll give you wider coverage, I'll give you better demographics, I'll give you all this stuff. And then your advertiser just went to Google, pays them $10,000, and now their ads are appearing on your websites, on your stuff, but you only got 15 cents. So this is the lawsuit that we're doing. I'm involved with it. Doug convinced me. I'm technical savvy, so I read the lawsuit, and I understood every single word, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we're getting creamed. So this is a really important time. If anybody knows our Attorney General, please go and say, we need to involve, the Attorney General needs to join the other 13 state Attorney Generals. Texas is leading it. He needs to join that so that we can now have our own political will into this dogfight. Because otherwise, we're going to lose our community news. The other piece that I wanted to talk about is, do we have any Bitcoin people, cryptocurrency people? Does anybody know about that at the moment? You've probably heard about it. Okay. So interestingly enough, Bitcoin wasn't the first blockchain. Now, when I say blockchain, let me give it to you really easy. Blockchain is just your bank transaction when you get in the mail, like for your credit card transactions. It's just a list of all the transactions that you've done. The difference in blockchain is that that transaction is public and it's in, 30,000 servers around the world. So if one blows up, you got it all, you got this list. So you have this record of, in perpetuity that's going to be there so you can verify your transactions. Blockchain was actually invented to establish ownership of documents. Ownership of documents, not it's the financial transaction people. They go, oh, hey, let's use that. So has anybody heard of Web3 yet? Web3, okay, you have. Web3 literally is going to be the website that you know, but behind it there's going to be this bolting on of a blockchain that says, hey, Scott from West Virginia Daily News owns this title and summary and full on and whatever it is, just like the AP News does watermarks. I'm now watermarking all my titles and my summaries and my content. And so anywhere that goes now, I own it. And I can verify that, hey, I own that piece of content. And the thing that I've seen in the businesses is that newspapers have always been really concerned with being the guardian and the watchdog of, the community. They've always been about, let's expose corporate malfeasance and, government corruption. What happened is that we've forgotten, we've been hoodwinked by Google, and our content has been stolen, and now is the point in which we need to say, oh, okay, we're going to own it back. The main example is when I purchased the West Virginia Daily News, Hinton News, the Valley Ranger, and now the Virginian Review in Covington. I now have all the archives literally from 1877 to present day in every place from Beckley to Covington. All along the rail line is where that is. And so I started looking at all that and going, okay, how am I going to digitize this and put it in there? And then I realized what had happened is that archives.com, ancestry.com, and newspapers.com have all gone to the public libraries because it's out of copyright and have sucked all of my content in there, put it behind paywalls, is now charging people $300 for using my content, and I don't get a cent of it. So newspapers at this point, we need to be at the point where, okay, how are we going to monetize our next generation going forward? So the blockchain and Web3 is going to be one area. The second area is, I know we're talking about the House bills at the moment for all the legals. And one thing that I said to Dawn is I said, make it so that the newspapers can use that in order to not only just get the initial income that comes in, but to monetize it going forward. Now, how many people get a public document from the city that's in PDF form, and then you have to type it all in and then put it back into the computer? What's happening is that we're going from computer to human to computer, and then to human and computer, because we think that we're really great at doing computer stuff, and we're not. So what I was saying to Dawn is, how about we come up with ideas where we're talking about computers talking to computers? We do that already. Google does that already. So why not have the newspaper still be the place where legals go, because we're like a notary in some way. We've been vetted by the USPS in our annual certification things. We're being vetted by Dawn here. So they know that we are a viable and vetted organization to put those daily news, those legals in there. And then once they go into our website, they get automatically fed to the corporate websites or whatever that transaction is. And then we're able to use that as putting monetization and ads around it and other things, or whatever we wanted to do with it, because it's still content that we can use and develop. So I think that's kind of all I wanted to say about that. If anybody wants to contact me, I think Dawn's got my phone number. I'm publisher at wvdn.com. It's pretty straightforward. I've been around computers forever, and I have 3 of them working for me right now. So please reach out and talk to me, and I'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, everybody, I think, that's kind of enlightening and refreshing to hear. I want to thank everyone for being here. It looks like we're getting done just in time. There's a school class coming. So I want to thank you. I know Senator Blair wanted to be here. He sends his apologies. He couldn't make it. But I think we had a very good panel. I thank all of you for being here, all of our publishers and all of our people. I'll send out information on all of our speakers. This was live streamed, and it will be recorded and be on West Virginia wvpress.org if you want to look back. Thank you again. That will conclude our day. I thank our board, our trustees, all of our paper companies, all of our reporters, and all the delegates. I encourage you to go to the Capitol now. You're here. Walk into the Capitol. You have time before the floor session. The floor session's at 11. And you have time to see your people. And if you don't see them in their office, you can catch them as they go into the chambers. Thank you very much for your time and your trip down. We appreciate it. Thank you. I think there's still food in the back, too, and coffee. So if you didn't get a chance to eat yet, go ahead.